Hey all, Scott here, and I can't wait to finally head to this game controller issues meeting I just found out about. Yeah, misread that pretty bad.
Whoa, my hands are doing this! And it wouldn't be possible without the overlooked messiah of all video games, the controller. So even back in the early days of scientists pissing around and making games on supercomputers instead of curing diseases, they had to create ways to play the games, like with the tried and true knob and button combo used for Tennis for Two in 1958. When arcade machines hit the scene, developers had to design the controls for each of their games, and thus their imagination wasn't compromised by limiting control methods. They could create whatever control method would suit their game best. Joysticks, trackballs, knobs, buttons, steering wheels. Each arcade machine was different from the last in terms of controls, so when home video game consoles were in development, there was definitely a hurdle to overcome. Developers were used to having free range with how to control their games in the arcade. How do you create a controller that can be a jack of all trades, one that can work with all, or at the very least, a lot of the games released at the time? Atari said f it and gave us a button and a stick.
Yep, I don't like this controller.
1972's Magnavox Odyssey sure did have a controller alright.
Yep, I don't like this controller.
The Fairchild Channel F predated the 2600 by a year, releasing in 1976, and has you holding a Snickers bar to control games.
Yep, I don't like this controller.
Why? Yeah, the Intellivision, ColecoVision, even Atari themselves with the Atari 5200 all followed the hot trend of putting a number pad on the controller.
Yep, I don't like this controller.
Well, after all that flopped, we then make our way to the Nintendo Entertainment System.
Yep, I don't like this controller.
The Vectrex in 1982 had a similar form factor for its controller.
Yep, I don't like this controller.
The NES Advantage is the controller you never let your daughter go to prom with.
Yep, I don't like this controller.
Now, with the introduction of the NES Top Loader, Nintendo redesigned the standard NES controller, nicknamed the Dogbone.
Yep, I don't like this controller.
Atari decided to barge into the party with their 7800 controller, and I'm pretty sure everybody stared at them until they released this instead.
Yep, I don't like this controller.
Of course, Sega had to do something different with the Sega Master System's follow-up, so they brought out this 3-buttoned hunk.
Yep, I don't like this controller.
Shove your hand between the couch cushions and you'll find various Sega Genesis controllers, each different from the last.
Yep, I don't like this controller.
The SNES controller is magnificent.
Yep, I don't like this controller.
Weirdly enough, with the release of the Super Nintendo Classic Edition in 2017, Nintendo re-released a new version of the controller with a less glossy, rougher type of plastic for the controller shell.
Yep, I don't like this controller.
Atari, just go home.
Yep, I don't like this controller.
After that bust, Sony created their own console based on their knowledge from working with Nintendo, which is pretty obvious looking at the controller.
Yep, I don't like this controller.
However, the PlayStation controller finally became a man with the DualShock. Look at the size of these things.
Yep, I don't like this controller.
But what if the DualShock just isn't doing anything for you, and you hate happiness? Here's the Nintendo 64 controller.
Yep, I don't like this controller.
Moving on, the Sega Saturn controller.
Yep, I don't like this controller.
But Sega also introduced the 3D control pad for a few games.
Yep, I don't like this controller.
And this controller leads us into its immediate successor on Sega's last home console, the Sega Dreamcast controller.
Yep, I don't like this controller.
But f that! PlayStation's back, baby, with the PlayStation 2's all-new DualShock 2.
Yep, I don't like this controller.
Well, moving past that, we have the introduction of the Xbox brand, and with it, holy shit.
Yep, I don't like this controller.
After Nintendo wouldn't stop laughing for 5 years straight, they really cleaned up their act with the GameCube controller.
Yep, I don't like this controller.
That's where the Wavebird comes in, a wireless variant of the controller.
Yep, I don't like this controller.
Wireless was truly the next step for controllers. We make our way to the Xbox 360, which has one of the most acclaimed controllers of all time.
Yep, I don't like this controller.
Microsoft later released 360 controllers with this transforming D-pad where you can have it like a traditional one or go back to this garbage.
Yep, I don't like this controller.
Next up, the PS3 controller. Jesus Christ, guys, it's been over 10 years at this point and you still haven't moved on?
Yep, I don't like this controller.
Now, everything was going pretty smoothly with controllers at this point.
No!
The 360 really hit it out of the park, the PS3 was going with a time-tested design, and Nintendo...
Yep, I don't like this controller.
But if you're more into the traditional side of things, might I suggest the Wii Classic controllers?
Yep, I don't like this controller.
Here's the Classic Controller Pro.
Yep, I don't like this controller.
Nintendo then put the Wii Remote in Photoshop, gave it a little of this, a little of that, popped a screen in the middle, and blam, Wii U gamepad.
Yep, I don't like this controller.
Nintendo offered a Pro Controller, and get ready, Wii U Pro Controller Defense Force.
I don't like this controller.
The PS4 controller actually switched some things up compared to the PlayStation controllers of the past.
Yep, I don't like this controller.
The Xbox One controller feels a bit like more of the same from the 360 controller, but with random tweaks and changes that feel both better and worse.
Yep, I don't like this controller.
That finally brings us to the Nintendo Switch's supply of controllers, the Joy-Con, the controllers that come packed in with the console.
Yep, I don't like this controller.
For me personally, I go for the Switch Pro controller.
Yep, I don't like this controller.
And then